often don't really think about how different parts of our world connect, do we? Like trees and education. Seems random.
Yeah, but those connections, they often hold the most interesting insights. And that's kind of what we're digging into today.
Exactly. We've got this pretty unique source material. It's an English textbook from Sudan.
Right, specifically for secondary school students. And it dates back to 1997. You might think, okay, a textbook.
Yeah, it's so special, but honestly, it gives this really rich view of that specific time and place.
Totally. It's not just dry grammar. You've got um, reading passages, dialogues, actual advertisements from the time.
Notes, exercises, even things like proverbs and puzzles, letters. It's a real mix.
Mm-hmm. And our plan, our sort of mission here, is to pull out the interesting bits.
See what it tells us about, Sudanese culture back then, the values being taught, how students saw the wider world.
So where do we start? There's a lot in here.
Well, one thing that jumped out straight away was the environment. It wasn't just a side note.
No, definitely not. There was a real focus on trees.
Yeah, and not just trees are nice, it was practical.
Exactly. Their role in providing fuel, which, must have been hugely important day to day,
Uh-huh.
but also things like preventing soil erosion, enriching the land for farming. It shows a real uh, practical environmental awareness was being taught.
Makes you think about the connection to the land, the resources people relied on. Then there was this other thing that kept cropping up, gum Arabic.
Ah, yes, gum Arabic.
I have to admit, I didn't know much about it.
Well, the textbook, I think it was in an advert, actually. It suggested Sudan was supplying something like 80% of the world's supply back then.
And 80%, wow.
Yeah. So not just some minor product, a major global commodity. It really shifts your perspective on Sudan's economic role at the time, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Okay, so environment, major exports.
Hmm.
What about, like, everyday life skills?
Oh, interestingly, cooking was mentioned.
Cooking in an English textbook.
Yeah. Which suggests, its fundamental importance. Maybe not something you just assume everyone knew, or perhaps highlighting its value. Practical skills for life.
Grounded in reality. Okay. And of course, there was grammar. You expect that. Passive voice, for instance.
Right. And teaching the passive voice, that might point towards needing it for more formal writing or maybe understanding news reports, official stuff.
Yeah, how information is presented. Interesting linguistic choice.
Hmm. And beyond pure grammar, skills like note-taking were included.
And even job seeking. For secondary students, that feels quite proactive.
It really does.
Yeah.
Especially in 97, teaching those skills explicitly says something about preparing students for, well, the future, for finding work. Very practical.
Definitely. Now, it wasn't all serious stuff. What about those proverbs you mentioned?
Ah, yeah, proverbs specifically about work. Those are always fascinating little windows, aren't they?
Totally. They pack so much cultural attitude into a few words about effort, contributing.
Exactly. Gives you a feel for the work ethic being encouraged.
And then, more subtly, there were hints about social dynamics, even touching on things like arranged marriage versus individual choice.
Which is quite something to find in a textbook. It's just, these were relevant conversations, things young people were thinking about or perhaps encouraged to think about.
Dealing with complex social issues, encouraging different viewpoints on family, autonomy.
Right. And core values kept coming true, too. Honesty, loyalty.
Woven into the lessons.
Yeah. Reinforcing that education wasn't just academics, but also, character building, ethics.
Right, right. And then, looking outwards, they included global figures. Martin Luther King Jr. was in there.
Yeah. Which is really significant, isn't it? Connecting students to these wider narratives of social justice, equality.
Shows an awareness of the world beyond Sudan's borders.
Absolutely. Exposing them to these big universal ideas and maybe drawing parallels or inspiring similar thinking locally.
It's amazing, really. Just this one English textbook opens up so much. Environment, economy, daily life, values, global awareness.
It really does. Even the small things, like vocabulary choices or the kinds of texts they used for reading practice, they all hint at underlying priorities.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into some of the specifics mentioned in the outline. We saw the dangers of two-wheeled transport mentioned, motorbikes,
Yeah?
bicycles.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It points to probably common modes of transport, but also acknowledging the risks involved. Again, very practical, real-world relevance.
Safety awareness being built in. Then there's the linguistic stuff. Prefixes were taught.
Standard language learning, sure,
Right.
but essential for vocabulary building. understanding how words are formed, like or
And distinguishing between direct and indirect questions.
That's about politeness, different registers of speech, important social and communication skill.
And tenses, obviously. Present perfect was in there.
Yep, I have finished versus I finished. Key for expressing past events with present relevance, a tricky one for learners.
Also skills like summarizing, taking a longer text and boiling it down.
Crucial academic skill, but also useful in life, right? Getting the main points.
Definitely. We mentioned MLK, but the textbook also covered things like silent letters in English.
Ah, the joys of English spelling, like the K in
Yeah.
essential pronunciation points.
And comparative adjectives. Bigger, faster, more important.
Fundamental for making comparisons, descriptions. They even had a comparison between buses and trains.
Oh, really? What kind of comparison?
Likely focusing on, advantages and disadvantages, cost, speed, comfort maybe. Again, very relatable.
Compound words, too, like textbook itself or sunshine.
Yeah, understanding how two words join to make a new meaning. Another vocabulary building block.
Okay, shifting focus a bit. Education itself was a theme. Someone named Abdallah Ragab was featured.
That suggests highlighting local figures, perhaps role models in education or another field, celebrating Sudanese achievements.
And there was specific mention of girls' education.
That's significant for 1997. It signals an awareness of, and likely support for, the importance of educating girls, which ties into broader development goals.
Absolutely. Back to grammar, countable and uncountable nouns. Apples versus rice.
A classic English grammar point, necessary for using articles and quantifiers correctly.
Present continuous tense. I am speaking.
Describing actions happening right now. Another core tense.
What about lighter stuff? Hobbies were discussed.
Yeah, seems like it. Good topic for conversation practice, talking about personal interests. Makes the learning more engaging.
And you mentioned puzzles earlier, like word games.
Could be crosswords, word searches, riddles maybe. Fun ways to reinforce vocabulary and get students thinking.
Okay, let's touch on women in society again. Beyond just girls' education, were there broader discussions?
The outline mentions women in society and also gendered language. That suggests a level of critical engagement with social roles and how language reflects or shapes them.
That's quite progressive, analyzing gender in language itself.
It could be as simple as pointing out policeman versus police officer, or maybe something deeper. Hard to say without seeing the exact page, but its presence is noteworthy.
Grammar, again, gerunds. Using the ing form as a noun like swimming is fun.
Yep, another common structure. And past perfect tense, I had finished. Talking about an action completed before another point in the past. Complex, but important for narrative.
Which ties into writing skills. Argumentative writing was taught.
Seems so. Learning how to build a case, present evidence, persuade. That's a high-level skill.
Alongside riddles, you mentioned. Kind of a contrast.
Yeah. Keeps it varied, I suppose. Engages different parts of the brain.
What about family? Dynamics, food, eating habits.
Those topics provide relatable content for language practice describing meals, family members, routines. Very culturally grounded.
Word families were also taught. Like employ, employer, employee, employment.
Yeah, help students expand their vocabulary efficiently by learning related words together.
Relative pronouns, who, whose, which, whom.
Essential for creating complex sentences, adding descriptive clauses. The book which I read.
And then a review of tenses, pulling it all together.
Always necessary. Consolidation is key.
Formal and informal letters, too. Different styles of writing for different situations.
Very practical. Job applications versus writing to a friend.
The theme of development came up again, specifically mentioning the Kenyan sugar plantation.
Interesting. Highlighting a major development project in Sudan. Connects language learning to national progress, perhaps.
Could be. And the flip side, illiteracy was mentioned as an issue.
Acknowledging challenges as well as progress. Shows a balanced perspective, potentially.
Language points keep coming. Phrasal verbs, look up, given.
Oh, the bane of many English learners. But unavoidable. They're everywhere in spoken English.
Order of adjectives, like a big red car, not a red big car.
Another tricky English rule. Necessary for sounding natural.
And comparing present simple and present perfect, I live here versus I have lived here.
Subtle but important distinctions in meaning.
Personal descriptions were practiced, describing oneself or others.
Good for basic communication, introductions.
And cultural differences, even fashion.
Wow, yeah. That suggests an awareness of intercultural communication, maybe comparing Sudanese customs or dress with others.
Expressions of quantity, many, much, a lot of.
Linking back to countable and countable nouns. Essential grammar.
Infinitive versus ing forms after certain verbs. I want to go versus I enjoy going.
Another complex grammar point focusing on verb patterns.
And more tenses. Present perfect continuous, I have been waiting. And past perfect continuous, I had been waiting.
Getting into the really nuanced aspects of expressing duration and time relationships. Quite advanced.
Narrative writing skills as well. Telling a story.
Builds on the tenses, sequencing events.
Word search is another puzzle element.
Fun vocabulary reinforcement, yeah.
And a topic on changing behavior. What could that be about?
Could be about health, habits, social change. Interesting. Suggests a focus on self-improvement or societal issues.
Even the song Auld Lang Syne was included.
Seriously, wow, that's unexpected. Maybe for cultural exposure. New Year traditions, hard to say.
Detective stories as reading material.
Fun. Engaging genre for practicing reading comprehension, inferencing.
More quantity expressions, few versus few, little versus little.
Subtle but important differences in meaning. Few implies not many. A few implies some.
The verbs make and let. My parents make me study, they let me go out.
Expressing permission and obligation. Common structures.
Passive voice came up again, specifically in the context of report writing.
Ah, that makes sense. Reports often use passive voice to sound objective. The decision was made.
A poem by Rudyard Kipling.
Interesting choice. Classic literature, but also potentially complex colonial context, depending on the poem, shows a breadth of literary exposure.
And finally, fuel and energy sources were discussed quite broadly, it seems. Nuclear, solar, biogas mentioned alongside traditional ones.
That's very forward-looking for 97, discussing alternative energy sources alongside the immediate reality of wood fuel. Shows awareness of future challenges and possibilities.
And the last grammar point listed prepositions in, on, at, under.
Always crucial, always tricky. Essential glue holding sentences together.
Wow. That's an incredible amount of ground covered in one textbook.
It really is. You get this amazing snapshot.
So if we had to summarize, pull out just a few really striking takeaways from this deep dive.
Well, for me, that gum Arabic stat really stands out. Sudan's huge role in that global market.
Yeah, definitely. And the environmental focus back in the late 90s, that emphasis on trees for fuel, yes, but also for the land itself, that feels quite ahead of its time in some ways.
It does. Also, the inclusion of figures like Martin Luther King Jr., that deliberate connection to global issues and struggles for justice.
And the discussions around women's roles, girls' education, even gendered language, it suggests, a society grappling with and teaching about these evolving dynamics.
Absolutely. And finally, that look towards the future with energy, nuclear, solar, biogas being mentioned, not just stuck in the present.
It just goes to show, doesn't it? You look inside something seemingly ordinary, like an old school textbook.
And you find these profound insights into a whole world. The values, the concerns, the knowledge being passed on at a particular moment.
It's a powerful reminder that what we teach and how we teach it says so much.
Definitely.
So maybe the question this leaves us with, and leaves you, the listener, with, is this. If someone looked at the educational materials we use today, right now, what story would they tell about our society?
What subtle messages, what priorities, what anxieties would they uncover 50 years down the line?
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it?
It really is. And look, if this conversation has piqued your interest in Sudan, maybe check out some current educational materials or just read more about its history and culture. There's always more to learn.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we have time for on this deep dive. Until next time, keep looking for those connections.
Keep asking questions. Farewell.